This video is designed to be a relatively brief introduction for the CRM online user to the service module. The reason I say relatively brief is because of all the modules in CRM Online, the service module could be construed as one of the most powerful. And it could also be construed as one of the most complex. Because the makers of CRM Online decided that it would be better to accommodate as many different types of service organizations as possible, while retaining the degree of simplicity to allow just about any service organization to make use of this. So for an overview video, we have to present the service module and its various components so that you can understand and decide which aspects of this module you may or may not use. So we're going to go through the components at a very high level. We're not going to dive in and how to create these records and so forth, how to manage them. We're just going to talk about the various entities in the service module and their various components and how they interact together as an overview. So, cases represent the heart and soul, so to speak, of the service module. And a case in CRM Online, or prior to CRM Online and CRM Dynamics, the earlier versions used to be called an incident. Essentially, a case in a service organization is something that happens that requires attention, also known as service requests, cases, incidents. So, if you're a service organization, you have an interaction with a customer. Sure, they may buy something, but if you're a service organization that solves problems, the service module may be for you. Or if you provide services of a certain duration, perhaps, that cost, maybe there's service contracts and so forth, maybe the services are somewhat driven by the number of cases, or the contracts are driven by a revenue amount, a dollar amount. The idea is that cases provide the way you track your interaction with the customer in a service organization. So let's take a look at, these are my active cases. Of course, typical views, as you see, these are all the cases and so forth. You can change the views. Let's open a typical case. So here is from the sample data, an average order ship time. So what we have here is, of course, a title, which is required, and a customer. Customers can be either contacts or accounts. They can be either people or they can be accounts. Good idea to understand is that when you relate the customer to the contact, in other words, if the case is at the contact level, it'll roll up to the account level. So Cat Francis's account, affordable equipment, will also show the case under their cases. If I were to click on affordable equipment, create this case for affordable equipment, assign it to Cat Francis as the customer, I would see this case in both areas. It's true throughout CRM, just something you should be aware of. Subject. The subject catalog is another component of the service module. And we'll talk about the subject catalog in general terms and broad terms in a moment. Case type. Of course, this is customizable. Is it a question? Is it a problem? Is it a request? You can customize that to anything you need it to be. Case origin. Again, customizable fields. So now we have assignment information, and this is important because in a service-based organization, generally users in the system own cases, and they are responsible for those cases and any activities that happen under those cases. You have the ability to follow up a case by a certain date, and then you have the status, priority. Typical service request information you might imagine. Now, there is another layer here that is supported in the service module, and that is contracts. The contract entity in CRM is generally, which is part of the service module, is generally geared towards service organizations, and we'll show what that We will show you what that looks like in a moment. But I want to make a point here with respect to what I said before, where this is built in such a way that just about any organization can use it. You'll notice that the contract line, the service level, product, serial number, you'll notice that all of these things, none of them actually have a requirement. You're not required to use them. So if you wanted to, you could customize your CRM to the point at which if you didn't have contracts, you could just remove these. But the point is that you don't have to use that part of the module. So this is a typical case, and a typical case may or may not have activities surrounding that case. So at a fundamental level, it's important to understand that a case is an issue that comes up, a problem or a question. Well, things that your service organization does to solve that problem, to interact with that customer, can be tracked, and they should be tracked using activities. So activities are assigned and associated with specific cases. It could be an email, it could be a telephone call, it could be any number of type of activities. Of course, it could even be a custom activity. In CRM 2011, we support custom activities. But the point is that at a fundamental level, you have to understand that activities are associated with cases in a many-to-one relationship. There can be any number of activities that are associated with a case. And activities roll upward. And I've been using this term roll upward, and in this video I want to explain it. If there is a parental relationship between a couple of entities in the system, and what am I talking about, right? If, for instance, there is what we call a parental relationship between the case and the customer, which means that if you were to delete this customer, you would delete all the cases under it. In other words, cases fall under customers. They're sort of more or less associated, attached to the hip with customers. If that's the case, if that's the situation, and that's the relationship between the customer and the case entity, that means any activities that I associate with this case will also appear and be seen under the customer. And in CRM 2011, out of the box, online, it is a parental relationship. That's pretty important for you to understand because you want to know where your data is going to be found. You want to know where someone might see a phone call associated with a case, in all cases, in all parts of the system. So I'm going to create an activity just to show the relationships between this. I'm creating activity, I'm creating a phone call. This is customer called in to complain. We save and close that. Very slight amount of information we need. Here we have an activity underneath this case, right? We have the case, we have an activity under that case. Well, the customer is at Advanced Components. Well, certainly you would want to see all of the activities under Advanced Components, right? So even if it was a case, whether it was some other aspect that you are serving this customer, you want to see all the phone calls. So let's check that out. Sure enough, we have customer called in to complain. That's the roll-up that I'm talking about. So remember that when you create activities under other modules, such as the service module, yes, you can certainly find those activities at the more macro level, in other words, at the case itself, right? You can certainly find those activities there, but you can also find those activities located at the account level. So it rolls up. That's what we mean by data rolling up. And in the service module, that's important to understand. Now, another component of the service module, staying at a relatively high level here, we have the service calendar. So the service calendar is designed for you to be able to keep track. If you have a service organization with a lot of users, a lot of people under your command that are servicing various customers, you want to know what they're doing and when. So what you end up creating are service activities to solve problems for customers. This is not to be confused with cases. Service activities are done in conjunction with the service calendar. So that would mean that this person, Jason Kelly, one of our users, would create a service activity to go out on premise or go out on site to solve a problem, or at least perhaps schedule a phone call that would show up in this calendar. And you would see those activities here going across this calendar, whether by the week, whether by the day, or whether by the month. You can change the views. You scroll over and you see all the activities that they are. Those are service activities. That's part of the service calendar. It's a certain type of view, and it's a certain way to use the service module. Service activities are actually types of appointments, so to speak, because they do synchronize with Microsoft Outlook, so they will show up as appointments in Outlook. Contracts. Contracts, very important aspect of the service module if you use contracts. Not so important if you don't. Nevertheless, we're just going to describe and show at the very high level what the contract entity is about. The contract entity allows you to create relatively complex contracts with customers which may have one or more contract lines. So if we say here we have a Master Services Agreement, MSA, for a particular customer. Master Service Agreement for affordable equipment. When does this master service contract start? Well, it can start today. When does it end? We'll give it a year contract. And you'll notice that when we save this, that the duration in days is automatically created, and the contract ID is automatically created. Billing information is pulled down, and so forth. And you see total price. Now, why is the total price empty? Well, because at that level, at the very creation of the actual master services agreement, or even the contract itself, you don't actually set things like pricing. What you do is you have underneath the contract lines. So this allows you to have one or more types of service delivery per contract. So I'm going to create a contract line, and you'll see there's a few fields here that are very important, and some of them do actually relate to price. So this will be the under the Master Services Agreement, we have the ability to do on-site repairs. Okay, that means we're going to travel there. Now, why would we want to break out into subcontractual lines? Well, some companies need to do that because the elements of the contract may change. For instance, if it's on-site or if it's off-site. An on-site contract, I would imagine, would have more complexity. You have the liability, you have the issues of travel, and you have all of these moving parts that are associated with on-site. So you might have to have a separate contract line for that, which is separate pricing and so forth. Right? You can choose to associate a product with it, or a unit with it, or a location, for instance, or a quantity, but you don't have to. The start date of the contract line can actually be different than the contract itself. So if this particular contract line for on-site repairs is only good for maybe, I don't know, 3 months, then you might make that change there. Now, this is where it becomes important to understand how this is organized. So what we have here is we have total cases or minutes. Now, it really depends on the terms of your contract. If it's if it's counted by minutes, right? What's going to happen is when you create cases and associate them with contracts, and the duration of the case is X number of minutes, it will automatically be counted toward that contract. If it's the number of cases, the number of cases will be automatically counted toward that contract. And this becomes very powerful because it's sort of an automated keeping track of the elements of your contracts and how you're meeting those, and whether or not it's time to renew the contract or time to change the terms. Because if you have a certain allotment in minutes and you go over, you want to know about it. You've come close to, or you're reaching, or maybe perhaps you've even gone past what the contract allows. So this is all very important and powerful for some organizations. I'm just showing it to you at the very high level. So if I were to say 3,000 minutes, a certain number of hours, I suppose, you'll see that allotments used and allotments remaining are actually blank, right? They're actually read-only. They're calculated by the system based on the cases that are associated with this particular contract line and this particular contract. This price for 3,000 minutes is, let's just say, $6,000. And then you'll see the rate is automatically calculated as well. You can put a discount there if you want to. And I'll save this. Before I save it, though, I want to point something out. I made a slight error on here on purpose, and I want to see if you can catch it. Take a look at this start date. Take a look at this end date. Remember when I said that I decided that the contract line would be a subset, perhaps, maybe just a few months, of the entire contract? Well, I put in 10/27/2012 by mistake. And what's interesting about this, and this is just a feature I want to point out, is if I were to try to save that, I would get an error. The start or end date is not valid. Now, why is that? Well, that's because the master services agreement is only good for 1 year. And I'm trying to create a contract line that's good for more than 1 year because I made a mistake. I went to 13 months. If I change this to 2011, which is what I intended to do, and I save it, I'm fine. And you'll notice here that I have a rate of $2 per minute, right? Because I've decided to use total cases or minutes. It's automatically calculated. Allotments remaining, 3,000, because I haven't used any yet. So I save and close this. And now I've built myself out at least the minimum requirements for a simple contract. So I have my contract, I've got my contract line. Now I can actually create cases associated with this contract. So I'll save and close. So you start to see how the contract entity works inside the service module. Another important aspect to understand is the subject catalog. Subject tree, actually, is a better term for it. Subjects. So subjects help you in a hierarchical fashion associate your cases. So I'm going to create a subject. Let's just say technical support. That's a very broad category, as you can tell. I'm going to say there is no parent subject right now. That's the highest level. I'm a technical support company. That's all I do is technical support, but I do different aspects of technical support. So I have a technical support, the beginning of a technical support tree. If I add a subject, the parent becomes technical support if I choose for it to be, and I could say that this is server maintenance. And now you'll start to see a subject tree. I have server maintenance under technical support. I create another subject, and I have desktop maintenance. It's typical in IT organizations. You have desktop maintenance, service maintenance, and why do you have that? Well, because you have different types of people usually supporting those kinds of machinery, devices. Now let's just say I was going to add a subject now, and I didn't want it to have a parent at all, because now I have a billing support. So now I have technical support and billing support. in my organization. I choose this and I click add a subject, and now I may have accounts payable, and perhaps I have accounts receivable. So I build this subject tree out in the settings module. And then when I go to the service module and I create a new case, when I go to choose a subject, I have this hierarchical, and this is good for complex organizations, I have this hierarchical tree by which I can choose. So if I know that this is a technical support case, I can click technical support and I can choose server maintenance. So you see how the subject tree works in conjunction with the case entity. Cases are generally, we hope, resolved. And so you'll see here that there's a big button that says resolve case. There's also cases can be canceled. Canceled cases are essentially deactivated cases. They remain in the system, but they're not in a state where you can do anything with them. Connect is a topic for another video. The idea here is that Connect allows you to connect or relate this record immediately to another record in the system. It could be just about any record in the system. Subject for another video, but the idea is it's a relationship. You can relate this to something else. Queues. Queues, again, subject for another video. A more detailed video about the service module, but queues are sort of work queues, and you can assign this to a specific queue. And of course, you could reassign this case. Now remember, what are you doing when you reassign a case? You are changing the owner of the case, which means that that case will appear in My Active Cases, which is, as you saw here, the default view, My Active Cases. So the cases that are assigned to me, cases that I am supposed to be solving, is the default view. If someone assigns me a case, this is where it'll show up. So if you're a service organization and you're watching your cases as they come in, you'll see them here. Services. This is not a particularly complex component. It's what we call a high-level component, but it's important because that your organization can create different types of services. So, for instance, if you have a service, a specific service, this is, let's just say, electrical maintenance. That's a type of service. In the type of service, you can designate the default duration of a service visit. You can sort of set when activities are started, by which sort of metric by which you would start activities. If the default duration is 1 hour, and there's really typically only one activity that solves it, then you could just have 1 hour, 1 hour. And then you could have beginning at. What is all this? Why are you doing all this? Because this relates very closely to the service calendar. Because if you have, for instance, something that begins at 8 a.m., when you go to add resources to perform that service, the schedule of the person you're adding has to conform to when the service actually begins. And what is the reason for all this? The reason is so this is how you can very carefully manage the resources you have who may be out on other cases or who may not work on Tuesday afternoons. And here it is, a certain time and day when you're scheduling this particular service at a certain time, a certain day. So subsequent videos, more advanced, will go into the actual configuration of this, but the point is that services, and you can have any number of services, have resources and specific selection rules, which says when you create a service, when you choose that service in a service activity, right, you must have a certain number of people from a certain site in order to perform that service. And you have to have those people available. And it's this back-end checking of availability that's very powerful in the service module. Not everybody will use this, but it's there if you need it. So that's the services as they relate to the service calendar for the most part. Goals. Goals are a relatively new concept in CRM 2011. And it allows you to define specific goals for your organization, and those goals sort of cut across a lot of different aspects of CRM 2011. But you can choose various metrics for your goals, and you can see number of cases is a typical one, number of product units, revenue. You can create new goals, goal metrics, I should say. You can specify owners, people who actually are bound by this goal. And of course, you can run reports, and you can have fiscal periods about how many cases you met during this fiscal quarter. And I mean, it's very powerful, and it allows some very quick insight into how your organization is doing. And if you're a service organization and you're going by cases, or you're going by number of minutes, or whatever, you're really able to have some insight into what's going on, and if you're meeting your goals or not. And of course, you can, like I said, create different kinds of goal metrics and so forth. Roll-up queries are a way for you to store in one place quick queries that you sort of roll up data and roll up information. It's just here, roll-up queries is a place for you to store your views. When you create a query, say you have some selection criteria, and you say this would be active cases in 2011, for instance, and you save it. Entity type, sorry, cases, and then here we're going to say where the created on is on or after 12/31/2010. And created on or before 12/31/2011. So view records and you see the cases which for 2011. You can save that. You would save that roll-up query, and then you'd have at your disposal, when you needed it, active cases 2011 roll-up query. You can have as many of these as you like, and it could be your pet queries, your pet reports, and so forth. Articles. Articles are what we call knowledge-based articles, and it allows you to create templates and types of articles which allow people who are performing the service activities to refer to and to associate their specific cases with the articles. So it's a place for them to reference, and you can place this article directly in, or relate this article directly in a case. You can create articles for that. So as you can see, the service module is robust, and it has a lot going on, and it has a lot of functionality. It doesn't mean you have to use all of it, but it's there. And this was designed to be just a sort of an introductory video to show you the various components of the service module in CRM Online. Thank you.